Welcome back to our Agon Institute, and today we're going to be talking further about the roots of the muscular Christian era. And muscular Christian was a term that was put together about 1857 to describe what was happening in the broader church movement to bring a more robust faith to the church of that day that was fairly feminized, if you will. We talked last time about Thomas Arnold and how he was the headmaster at rugby school. And today we want to talk not only about a precursor to the muscular Christianity era, but also about a founder of the movement. As you begin your slideshow there, that you will fill in the blanks and you'll take other notes, remember, of exam quality. Those of you that are taking this particularly for a degreed program, whether it be through the Agon Institute of Sports Ministry or seminary or college, you'll need to take not only the notes to fill in the blanks of this, but also additional notes that would be of exam quality. So follow along. If you're taking this for certification, take whatever notes you feel good about, but all of you, remember, take the notes that God is impressing upon your heart and mind for your ministry. So there's a couple of books listed there in the first slide that can give you some further study if you want to go in and read some more about this man, George Williams. But let's look at his early life. Born in Somerset, England. This is in Wales, if you will. He was the youngest of 8 sons who were born to a farmer, and quite honestly, he was a terrible farmer. And he quit school at about age 13, was not particularly astute in any of these areas, although he was very intelligent. They say that he got his cheery and winning manner, if you will, from his mother, and yet his indomitable and unquenchable will and enthusiasm from his father. The last day of farming was the day that he put the wagon, horse, and load of hay in a ditch. And his brothers came to his dad and said, "Dad, we got to get rid of him. We can't keep undoing what this guy is doing." And he was then apprenticed to a draper in Bridgewater. Think textile mill, if you will. That's what a draper was called then. He was 13. He was traumatized when he was dropped off to be an apprentice there. You can imagine, those of you, just taking your child and putting him in the hands of someone else. His apprenticeship was catalytic to his life. His mentor, the person that employed him, required church attendance by all of those that served underneath of him. And he was obviously influenced by him, but also influenced by his peers. But it was not so much what his fellow apprentices and peers or his mentor boss said, but rather it's what they didn't say that really grabbed George Williams' attention, and that is their lack of profanity. You see, that to him was very significant because he had been grown up in a culture that all of that was okay. But now he had a situation in which these people didn't have any of that. Their love for him influenced him to consider Christ. So they didn't say these words, and they acted in such a way that he was really struck. His heart was arrested, if you will, by this. Now, being required to go to Zion Congregational Church, he was influenced then by an unknown preacher. And it was on a cold winter's evening at a cold stone church in 1837 that Pastor Evan James preached a salvation message, and George responded. Now, Evan James had no great reputation for talent as a preacher other than simple faithfulness. And in fact, George Williams' conversion is probably the brightest gem in the unfading crown of a simple country minister of the gospel, who in the common round of his work, this is Evan James, without taking special thought or making a special appeals, was simply the means of leading George Williams to Jesus. I wonder what your brightest gem in the crown that you'll be placing at the foot of Jesus, as the book of Revelation says. Because you see, George Williams went on then to it having an incredible amount of influence throughout the world. Now, Williams went on from there and became greatly influenced by Biney and Finney. Finney, the great evangelist of America that set up the first university in America at Oberlin College, his emphasis was on deep prayer, particularly on behalf of non-believers. Out of that came an Andrew list that Williams demanded that all YMCA members later would get involved with an Andrew list. Andrew the disciple put Peter on his list, his brother, and brought Peter to Jesus. And even today in CSRM, all of our staff and board are asked to keep an Andrew list. Who are they? Who am I keeping on my Andrew list? Who am I praying that Jesus would win their heart? Who would I bring to Jesus? And also, from Finney, he got much what Thomas Arnold was teaching, and that is that the integration of faith and everyday life and business, let's integrate our faith into what we do on a daily basis. And that the great business of life, according to Finney, was the business of evangelism. So you can see where Finney greatly influenced George Williams. Now, Biney, on the other side, said that we don't win others by just preaching at them, but we win them by love. And his emphasis was upon character development. So, Finney's soul winning was more confrontational in style. And it really wasn't sustainable long term, although his motivation was right and it was strong. In fact, one of the stories about Finney was in Oberlin, when he was president there at Oberlin College, that he walked down the street and he ran into a woman of the street, a harlot, if you will. And as he walked up to her, he said to her, "You are a child of the devil." You get a sense of the confrontational style. And not to be outdone, the woman responded, "Yes, Father, it's been a long time since I've seen you." You get a sense of the confrontational Finney and how that would not be sustainable and how it would not be winsome. So Williams got from Finney this drive, we got to do it, let's go out and get it done. But from Biney he got, let's do it relationally. And you're going to see this as it comes through. So the mission for Williams begins. He was one of 140 young draper's assistants, all living together, usually 5 to a room. Now, this is after he has now moved into London, and he's joined George Hitchcock at a new drapery. There is where he began to distinguish himself, and he eventually became a partner with Hitchcock. As he moved in, and he was the new kid on the block, and there's 140 other young men living in his quadrants, and you have to understand that their bedrooms and their dorm rooms would be there, and then they would walk right through the door, and right through the door would be this place where they would work in the textile mills. And they would work sometimes 12 to 16 hours a day. And during this time now, he began to pray with the only other person he could find that was a Christian, who lived across the hall from him. And he wrote in his diary, this is Williams, "We met, our numbers grew, and the room was soon crammed. And in answer to prayer, the Spirit of God was present, and we had conversion after conversion." But notice, we prayed, and we met. Met meaning we're praying, and the numbers began to grow. A key element from Williams: prayer is the foundation for what we're doing. Well, soon other rooms were needed to accommodate the scores of employees that began to come to these prayer meetings and turned into Bible studies. And these employees came to Christ. And those people that were involved eventually included the firm's president, George Hitchcock. He professed a new faith in Christ and was so impressed, I guess, that 12 years later, in 1853, he even let Williams marry his daughter. So these drapers began to think and pray for the other drapers. There were 11 others besides Williams, more than half of who were converted by Williams. And they decided to begin what they called the Young Men's Christian Association, the YMCA, on June 4th of 1844. Wow, how long time ago. Let me share with you a couple of conversions, or conversations rather, that Williams had with a man by the name of John R. Mott. Mott was the man who Williams passed the YMCA legacy on to. Mott asked Williams what they had hoped. What were these 12 men hoping that started the YMCA? What did they hope to accomplish? This is Williams' response, quote, "We had only one thing in mind, and that was to bind our little company together in order that we might the better lead our comrades to Christ." In order to lead our comrades to Christ. The only thing, he said, in their mind was to lead their comrades to Christ. How focused are you in your ministry? Can you say with the saints in the past centuries, "Give me souls or I perish"? And then another conversation. This was on Williams' deathbed. Williams asked Mott, "Mr. Mott, are you ever alone with a young man that you do not talk with him about Jesus Christ?" Even on his deathbed, Williams was riveted on this thing of winning people to Christ. So you can begin to see that through these various influences, that Williams began to shape his own philosophy. The theology, level 1, be intentional, be strong, be courageous, but also be winsome. And now the philosophy was, let's meet the perceived need of those that are out there. And then methodologically, what does that mean? For Williams, it meant things like, don't argue with a man. Take him to supper. Many of his men that came to know Christ did so over a meal. Get to know the men by name. All the men that came into the YMCA, all the men that worked for Williams at the drapery shop. Write them letters. Communicate with them. Take them to lunch. Know them by name. Get to know them. Write them letters. Go for walks with them. Take them for tea. Give them warm handshakes. Have warm hearts with loving souls. You can see relational evangelism. He really was influenced by binding. Now this gives you some of the ways that meeting the perceived needs, meeting the men where they were, those that were working in cotton mills, those that were in the army, those that were lumbermen, and the railroad YMCAs. He literally built YMCAs right on the railroads so that those railroad workers that were going to build the railroad or traveling the railroad would have a place to stop and take part in a Bible study. Close to me, there's a railroad YMCA that's still in existence today. And there was another one that I grew up near in my city. And men could come from all over the world and stay in a YMCA overnight or for a week while they were there working and hear about the why. And another example for Williams was reliable men. This is the Timothy 2 chapter that we have in one of our devotionals for this course. He believed that he managed the men who managed the business. You catch that? His workers absolutely loved him. He fought for shorter work weeks. He helped his workers out financially. He prayed for and with his workers. He encouraged them to go into ministry. In fact, he often paid for their seminary training. These were workers. He was going to lose a good worker, but he would pay for their seminary training. And it was often that people would know that when his door was closed and the shade was pulled, that he was on his knees either praying with or for those that were on the floor of his business. You see, he never became a YMCA staff person. He always remained a businessman, but he always was in the business of the kingdom. And these pictures on the bottom of your slide, you'll see this is the YMCA in London, England, that has continued on since 1844. Now, it's not the exact same building, but it's the same organization that has never ended, still trying to meet the needs, the perceived needs of those people in those business, in the business world and others that come to the YMCA. Well, he married well. He probably also married wealth, and if you have a choice, both are probably good. But he married well. He married Helen in 1853, and he had 5 boys that joined him, 3 at least in the business. One became a lawyer, and one went into the ministry. He had one daughter, and that daughter was his one life's heartache. Because you see, in 1881, tragedy struck when his only daughter, Nellie, died suddenly at age 19. Williams was devastated. His grief was shattering to him. Only time brought any amount of healing for that wound. But it caused him to become even more compassionate about those who suffered. And he moved the YMCA to consider those who suffered and how could they help those people. Well, the Jubilee year, 50 years. And the Jubilee was with the YMCA, 50 years in the Y, 50 years of marriage. And then the North American Y celebrated 50 years. And it started 10 years after the London Y. He was knighted by the Queen. Queen Victoria knighted him, in fact, on the 50th anniversary of the YMCA, quote, for his distinguished service to the cause of humanity. Well, in 1886, he had amassed a fortune, and he gave away generously to missions. His criteria for giving, what was it? The mission must, quote, zealously proclaim the gospel, end quote. He turned the business over to his sons and intensified his support of Christians' endeavors, especially the YMCA. By 1904, this man had become physically weakened, and a year later he died. 1,400 pastors had preached a YMCA message at a service on the 50th anniversary. And now, some 20 years later, this man had died. And downtown London came to a halt. Very reminiscent of more recent years of Lady Di's death. And if you remember how the people lined the street, this is what they did for George Williams. And despite a steady soaking rain, as only England can seemingly have, crowds lined the streets in silence to witness the funeral procession to St. Paul's. There it was said of George Williams, he lived not to himself, but to the glory of God in the service of man. He lived not to himself, but to the glory of God in the service of man. May it be said of all of us. He was quoted as saying, God grant that we may go on prospering, the YMCA, and that he will give us friends who will help us to win young men all over the world for Christ. End quote. Are you getting a sense of his focus? How's your focus? He went on to give the example of one man who had come to the Y as a man in trouble in every way, but had come to salvation in Christ through the YMCA. And that man went on to become a successful businessman who maintained a strong Christian influence. It was for men like that, George Williams said, that I'm going to pour myself out. And he implored all that listened to him on that Jubilee Day that he talked about winning such men to Christ. So you see, the end of his life was as stronger than the beginning. Let me wrap this section up by telling you this story. There were these 10 men in George Williams before there were 11 in George Williams. And they were praying and talking about who they could reach. And there was one particular fella who had been giving some of them a rather hard time in the dorms there at the drapery business. And they were praying for his soul and thinking about how to reach him. And some of the guys just said, this guy can never be reached. Well, Williams said, what does the man like? What does he like to do? And one of the guys there said, I don't know what he likes to do, but I know what I'd like to do. I'd like to pop him one. I'm tired of him belittling us and making fun of us. Williams said, well, does anybody know what he likes to do? And they didn't really know. They didn't have a lot of off time. They worked 6 days a week, 12, 16 hours a day. But one of the guys said, I don't know what he likes, but I know what he likes to eat. He likes to eat oysters. Williams say, let's have an oyster bake next Lord's Day. Who knows him well enough that can invite him? One of the guys said, well, he doesn't treat me too bad. I'll invite him. They invited Mr. Edwards to this oyster bake. In his records, Edwards says, he was most taken by the men's frivolity, meaning he loved having a good time with them. And so he was kind of interested to see how these men who had had such good times were going to act. And decided he liked oysters, so he accepted the invitation and he showed up. It was there and through that he became a Christian. A few months later, he became the 12th man. He became one of the founding 12 of the YMCA. The man who liked oysters. And in fact, today, his is the only original YMCA membership card that is still in existence. The man who was won through an oyster bake. Now, I think you get a sense from this about how to go and create a model for your sports ministry. There's lots of stuff in George Williams. And you have to understand that in this journey that we're on during this course, that these men that we're talking about were the pioneers. They were the ones that started the muscular Christianity movement, of which the sports outreach movement, we are the heirs to that muscular Christianity era. They started this. They had these kind of concepts. My prayer for you is that Jesus Christ will use these models for you to form your own models. Thanks so much for being part of this. Make sure that you get your notes all the way taken and filled out so that you can receive a top level grade and marks for this course. And as we continue on our journey, we're going to move next time into the muscular Christianity movement itself. We're going to talk about the stud brothers and more lessons, more models that we can glean in this more modern era. Talk to you then.